All right, thanks for being with us. This is the first week of our study in the cross-centered life. Each week we're going to be going through one chapter. And to do that, we're going to do a recap video and have some different guests on each week to sort of talk through the chapter. So this week we have one of our new additions to the Youth Leader team, actually just this year. So hello there.
My name is Josh. How are you doing?
I am doing very well, Josh. Nice to see you. During these interesting times. Hey, so Josh joined just this year, actually, which has been kind of a rough year since there's this global pandemic that some people may have not heard about yet, but it's happening, and that's made youth leading a little bit different, Josh, but we are still super excited to have you. So maybe just a few minutes, Josh, just to get to know you, introduce you a little bit. So where are you from? What's your favorite candy bar? How'd you come to know the Lord? Maybe just in a little nutshell, what's the most awkward thing that's ever happened to you besides this video? Yeah.
Well, my name is Josh. I'm originally from Iron Mountain, actually. I came to know the Lord last year. I grew up Catholic, actually, and came to know God's saving grace through one of my friends bringing me to church last year. And so I've been following Christ for about a year and a half now. I moved back from Texas, and really excited to be a part of the team and go through a lot of good truths in this book here to start off. Honestly, all candy bars are good. I don't have a favorite, so...
That's good. Yeah, it doesn't pay to have too stringent of candy bar standards, because then you just eat less candy bars and you can't have that. So, well, what you been thinking about lately, Josh? What's been keeping you up at night?
Ooh, well,
good things, bad things, stressful things, happy things.
Yeah, I'd say trying to keep the truth of the gospel at the forefront of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of, like you said, a lot of interesting things happening right now. So
yeah,
just keeping the truth that God's grace is upon us as believers. Mm-hmm. That we keeping that in front of my mind.
Yeah. The times we're in make it more difficult in a lot of ways, for sure. Just the gatherings together of believers that are, it's just super important and encouraging, and kind of the times we're in just make it really hard to do that the same as before. But something I've been trying to think about lately is there are some ways that maybe the times we're in and the circumstances, maybe there's some ways that it's easier actually to pursue God and grow in relationship with Him, and that's just been a challenging thought for me because we do have some more downtime than usual. And I don't know, that's just a tricky thing. So part of that is why we're actually doing this book study, honestly, is just being able to have some downtime to read, and the pace of life for many of us has really slowed down a lot, and these are good times to sit down on a rainy day and read a really good book that really pushes us towards God. So could be really good. So, well, hey, Josh, let's get going on this book. And each of us have read chapter 1. Hopefully, all of you who are watching have read chapter 1. And we just want to breeze through some of the highlights and talk about some of the significant things that are in it. So let me read this quote really quick. Chapter 1 is called Restating the Obvious. So the author shares, about 25% of the way into the chapter, this George Orwell quote where he says, "Sometimes the first duty of intelligent men is the restatement of the obvious." And I just thought that was a really good quote because we forget things so easily. And other times we move on from really important things, like our eyes kind of look at it and then we move on to the next thing and move on to the next thing. And our lives are so fast-paced, sometimes we don't just look intently at one thing and look deeply into it for long enough. So that quote was really interesting. Like, it seems more intelligent to maybe skip over lots of things and look widely but sometimes the obvious things that are right in front of us are the things that we need to pay attention to. So I don't know. Right off the bat, I mean, the title and that quote already make the chapter pretty intriguing. So anyway, Josh, what maybe just what stood out to you in this chapter? I know one of the discussion questions in the study guide that we've been giving everyone along with the book. One of the discussion questions just asks, like, what are some of the things you highlighted, underlined, or circled, things that stood out to you? So yeah, maybe what's been standing out to you in the chapter so far?
So on page 10, towards the end of the page there's a quote in the book, you don't need a new truth, guard the one truth, keep the one message. And that it kind of builds off of what you said, that we're kind of jumping to the next thing and kind of forgetting here and there. But I mean, if there is one thing that we should remember, one thing that should be coming out of our mouths, it should be the gospel, the one truth.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Just read on the next page, on page 11, one of the guys says, you can't really talk about all the little pockets of Christianity. So there's lots of areas, right? I mean, there's, like his list was things like super smart guy terms, but Christian ethics and apologetics and maybe in normal terms like end time, and just there's lots of pockets of Christianity, and he made the point, like, you can't talk about any of the fringes of Christianity without eventually getting back to the center of Christianity. And yeah, like, that's a tendency. Like, we can get so wound up in some of the pockets of Christianity and kind of lose track of that one truth that you're talking about. Hey, that actually leads to kind of an interesting question. I mean, the book title is called The Cross-Centered Life, but if you had to rephrase, like, the idea of a cross-centered life, I think there's more than one way to label that concept. So the author chose The Cross-Centered Life, but maybe what's a different way that you could think of, that you could put almost a different title on this book? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Don't want to reuse the word center, but
Yeah. You can
say
use whatever words you want.
I would say keeping Christ first, maybe. Just putting him at the top of your list of day-to-day activities, no matter what you're doing, keeping that at the top of your list.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, the Christ. What did you say it was? Christ first? Keeping Christ first.
Keeping Christ first, there we go.
That was it. Keeping Christ First by Josh Kramer. Except for, you might want to come up with initials instead. This guy just calls himself CJ. So,
Ooh.
what would your fancy author name then be? J. What's your middle name?
J. It's Alan, so it'd be.
Oh, J.A. Kramer.
J.A. Kramer.
That's your new theologian name. That's great. Yeah, I think that would be keeping Christ first, cross-centered. Because, yeah, the idea, like, the cross stands for Christ, and it stands for the gospel. And those are all really churchy terms that sometimes we can throw around. But, yeah, knowing that they really are all pointing to the same thing. And throughout this study, we're going to get a better idea of what the gospel is, what it means to be a follower of Christ, what it means to talk about the cross, and what all those words actually mean. But yeah, the quote you mentioned is part of that whole section. I think the section is even just kind of talking about one truth. The first 4 pages are all about, one truth. It's kind of interesting. The idea of there being any truth, let alone just one truth, is actually not a super popular opinion. So they asked, they as in Barna is a really interesting polling group where they go around and they ask people questions, and then they tell you how many of the people said A or B or C. So they asked people about moral truth, or being able to know what is right and what is wrong. And Josh, what percentage of teens do you think said that there is such a thing as moral right and wrong?
70%.
It was 6%.
I was close.
Six. Yes, 6% of teens said that there was such a thing as you can definitively say, this is the morally right thing to do for everyone. So instead, like the popular cultural thing to say is that, you know, the morally right thing for me to do, Josh, might not be the morally right thing for you to do. And so that's like a super popular thing these days. But this book is actually saying something very opposite. And the letter from Paul to Timothy is saying very much the opposite. He's saying that there is one truth, that there is something that's true for all of us, and that one truth should be, it's not just, you shouldn't just agree that it's true, it actually should be the most important true thing on the whole list of true things that there are in your life. So I think that's really interesting. So yeah, this idea of one truth, what else stood out to you?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because I was kind of thinking it almost where, I mean, everyone, like you might say, your truth is that pizza's your favorite food. That's no doubt everyone's favorite food. And I'm going to say, no, it's a cheeseburger.
Yeah.
And I mean, these aren't truths. They're more opinions. But as I guess the one thing that all believers have in common is that one truth of the gospel.
Yeah, and that's pretty cool too, because like, you know, I mean, this book is like that one truth, the gospel should be the center of my life, but it's the center of your life too, and it's the center of all of our lives as the church. So that is pretty sweet. Like deep down, we have this one thing in common that is true for all of us. It's really good. So when the gospel or the cross or Christ, I think you could use any of those words, is at the center of our lives, it obviously changes our lives just hugely. And I've heard you talk a lot before about how the gospel has changed your life, that when the cross became the center of your life, so many things changed for you. And every Christian can say that when the cross becomes central, then everything in your life finds its place, you know, orbiting around that. But one of the cool things about this book is it doesn't just tell you about, hey, the cross-centered life, and it's great. It also helps you to see if your life is cross-centered. And on page 16, it's got these bullet points that are symptoms that arise from not being cross-centered. And these bullet points were very familiar to me. I think I've probably related to all of them at some point in my walk with Christ. How did you find those bullet points on page 16?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the Christian life is a journey, and so, like you said, for me, that there's kind of been ups and downs too, where it's sometimes you feel really close to the Lord, but then there's other days where you just don't feel that way, and then you have to evaluate, is the cross really at the center of my life or not right now?
Yeah, and I think that's just because, and I think what you're saying, like, is that the cross sometimes wavers, like the crosshairs are, when they're over our hearts, then, you know, we experience a closeness with God, but when they start to wander and we start to center our lives on things that are not the one truth or the gospel or Christ, however you want to phrase that, then things start to sort of fall apart and things start to happen in our lives that we don't want to. So yeah, I mean, those 4 bullet points, when Christ is not at the center, when the cross is not at the center, you lack joy. You are not consistently growing in spiritual maturity. Your love for God lacks passion, or you're always looking for some new truth or new experience that will put the pieces of your faith together. And yeah, Yeah, I mean, I've experienced a lot of those. I think one of the big ones would be this new experience thing. That's kind of when I was in high school, junior high. When the cross was wavering, when it wasn't planted in the center of my heart, then I think one of the major symptoms that arose was that fourth bullet point there of I would look to the next retreat that we would go on as a youth group. I would look to the next week of summer camp. I would look to the next thing like that to put me back together. And those things were helpful, and I think they reminded me a lot of what the cross is supposed to be in my life. But I was relying on them. I was relying on those experiences, and not just relying myself on the cross itself to be at the center of my life. So that was just my experience with one of those bullet points. Do you have any just experience of any of those four bullet points of your life when the cross is wavering as the center of your life?
I think for me, I could probably most relate to the first one. You often lack joy, and maybe not necessarily like more or less trying to look for joy somewhere else than in the cross. If I don't feel trying to use worldly things to try and fill that joy, except really that joy comes from the Lord when
Yeah.
when you're following the cross like that.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, I can relate to that a lot as well. So yeah, it's interesting, like that this book, it really does it's kind of like that classic example that you maybe hear of, like when somebody's really trying to help you. It's kind of like a doctor with a scalpel, and sometimes to be helped, there is some pain and there is some surgery involved, and the Bible does that. But I think the mark of any good book, even that isn't the Bible, is that they'll do that too. And so this book, it really does kind of cut a little bit, because it says, hey, like, it sort of does prod into your sort of sore spots and into the weaknesses that are present maybe in our faith. So yeah, it's interesting that way. A good book is oftentimes going to smack you in the face a little bit, and I think that this one certainly does in some ways, for sure. Well, what else has stood out to you in this chapter, Josh?
I think just we kind of moved through the chapter, except going back to the beginning of the chapter, where he talks about Paul being in prison and facing death just so boldly, and just the fact that he had so much trust and faith that he was, as he says, to live as Christ, to die as gain. He just went all for it. And I mean, it's easy to put yourself in that situation and say, I'd do the same thing, except, I mean, Paul was living it every day of his life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's easy to say, like, oh, yeah, I do that too. But yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, Paul really went there and really was around people. I mean, ultimately, he lost his life for the faith. And so Paul wasn't just talking big when it came down to it. I mean, his life really was rooted in that one message. He lived for it and died for it, for sure.
And then even Timothy's, he's scared for him, and he's not even the one kind of in prison at this point. So
yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, in Paul's life, lots of people were scared for him. There's some other accounts where he's like, I'm going to Jerusalem, and they're like, Paul, if you go there, it's over for you. And he's like, I'm going. I don't know. Yeah. No, his life was cross-centered, and it really displayed like the cross-centeredness of his life came out on the surface. I think that's a big part of what the cross-centered life is it does not remain hidden, for sure. You just want to read in terms of, like, we talked about the symptoms of not having a cross-centered life on page 16, but then kind of what you're getting at with Paul are some of the results of having a cross-centered life. When the cross does become more centered, it says things like this, and these bullet points that start at the bottom of page 16, it says, you break free from joy robbing legalistic thinking and living. We'll learn more about legalistic and what that means in further chapters, but it also says how to leave behind the crippling effects of guilt, how to stop basing your faith on your emotions and circumstances, how to grow in gratefulness, joy, and holiness. So essentially, I mean, it's like a lot of those things describe Paul's life, and it does say in the Bible, Paul wrote, imitate me, like I'm imitating Christ, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And yeah, really what he's saying is he's like, I'm living this cross-centered life, and live it with me. And these are the types of things that happen in your life when you begin to live the cross-centered life. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I like the point that you made that, I mean, it was outwardly shown that he was living this cross-centered life. If you're truly living that way, I mean, everyone should be able to see it. And I mean, it's not always the case where that's, I mean, it's easy to try and be like Paul and do that, except it's harder to live it out.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, it's a challenge. The cross-centered life is not easy, but if there's one thing that we need to hear as young men, that you guys need to hear, that anybody needs to hear, is that what is worthwhile and what is good is rarely what is easy and fast. And so, yeah, I mean, if you're looking at Paul and being like, man, like by tomorrow morning, I want to be living like this dude, or if you're looking at this book and it's really short, and that can be deceiving because you're like, man, I'm almost going to read this book and I'm going to be all cross-centered at the end of it. And he's like, well, you may be more cross-centered at the end of it, but it's a journey. It's long and it's hard and it's difficult. But like all the things that are good and worthwhile, it is not easy, and it doesn't come at the snap of the finger. So yeah, this book is a challenge for us because, like as you said, Josh, like the cross comes out, and I think for many of us, we're picking up this book, and the cross and the gospel and those traits that we listed, like some of those things aren't coming out, or at least we can all say they're not coming out like they should. And and so that's why, kind of as we get into this book, chapter 1, it's like, we need to recognize where we're at and really ask that God would kind of hold our hand through this and teach us and grow us and kind of haul us almost forcibly towards a cross-centered life because we need his help. Because we can't achieve this on our own. So, well, what else? Anything else from the chapter? And then we're running low on time, and we'll wrap up unless you've got anything else.
No, we pretty much hit on everything that I had highlighted here.
Yeah. There's a lot in the chapter. They are short, but yeah, they are really good. So,
I mean, if we had 2 more hours, we'd probably fill that time pretty easy.
Yeah, we certainly probably could. Yeah, it's a short book, but it doesn't have to be long to be deep or profound. So, well, we'll leave chapter 1 at that. I hope you're reading it. I hope you're finding value in it. I hope it's showing you where you're at and showing you where God would want you to be. So, as we keep doing this, after you see this video, that pretty much starts chapter 2. So, once you've got chapter 1 filled out and you've kind of spent some time in the study guide here, writing down some things that struck you from chapter 1, then go ahead and move on to chapter 2 and get into that one. It's called What's Your Life Centered On? Super good chapter, and we'll be back at the end of the week with another just kind of a recap, another discussion about chapter 2 as well. So anyways, we love you guys. We're praying for you. We're all trying to grow in this weird time, and it helps that we're here together. Josh, I'm encouraged by you just being here, and hopefully all of us can just be an encouragement to each other to keep on pursuing God and to keep on chasing after Him. So look for chapter 2's video in a week's time, and we'll see you then.